Ever imagine treating depression with good vibrations? And I don't mean like good vibes, but like
Hmm.
actual physical vibrations.
Right.
Get ready because today's deep dive is going to get a little weird.
Yeah.
We're talking about the work of Dr. Stuart Hameroff and the idea of, get this, tuning the brain with ultrasound.
It's pretty radical stuff. Dr. Hameroff, he spent his entire career trying to understand, like, the secrets of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And he thinks he's found the key in these tiny little structures inside our brain cells. They're called microtubules.
Microtubules. Okay. So before we get to the brain tuning part, I think we need to break down what those are exactly
Yeah.
because I'm lost already.
So imagine scaffolding inside your cells, but like on a microscopic level, right?
Okay.
These microtubules, they help cells hold their shape and they move things around. They're essential for cell function.
So they're like the cells organizers, keeping everything tidy, keeping it running smooth there.
Exactly, yeah. But Dr. Hameroff, he believes that they're doing a lot more than just cellular housekeeping. He thinks that they might actually be involved in processing information, maybe even generating consciousness itself.
Okay, now that's a pretty wild thought. How does he think that's even possible?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Um, he proposes that consciousness arises from quantum processes.
What?
Yeah.
Quantum processes.
Quantum processes occurring within these microtubules.
So we're talking about physics at the smallest possible scale happening inside our brains.
You got it.
Wow.
And this is where ultrasound comes in.
Okay.
So we usually think of ultrasound as a way to image babies, before they're born.
Right, right.
But it can actually influence these microtubules directly.
I'm with you so far, but how does sound affect something as tiny as a microtubule?
Okay, so ultrasound works by sending out sound waves that vibrate at a really, really high frequency, right?
Okay.
And this creates mechanical vibrations. Dr. Hameroff's hypothesis is that by targeting specific frequencies of ultrasound at the brain, we could, like, tune these microtubules, in a sense.
So we could influence our brain activity and even potentially our consciousness just by using sound waves.
That's the idea. It sounds pretty sci-fi, but there's actually a growing body of research looking into this.
Okay. Now I really need to hear more. What kind of research has been done? Has anyone actually tried this?
Well, you can imagine this idea was met with a lot of skepticism from the scientific community.
Yeah.
Consciousness is one of the biggest mysteries in science. And not everyone agrees with Dr. Hameroff's interpretation.
It does sound pretty out there, I have to say. But then again, so many scientific breakthroughs probably did
Yeah.
at first.
Right.
Like, if it wasn't met with skepticism, was it even a good idea?
Exactly.
So I'm curious, with this much skepticism, how do researchers even begin to study something like this?
But Dr. Hameroff, being the pioneer that he is, he actually conducted an experiment on himself.
What?
Yeah, he wanted to see if directly applying ultrasound to his brain would elicit any kind of noticeable effects.
He experimented on himself.
He did, yeah.
I have to admit, that's dedication.
Oh, yeah.
So what happened? Like, did he suddenly become enlightened?
Not quite. He did shave his head for the experiment, though,
Okay.
to ensure that the ultrasound waves could reach his brain unobstructed.
Makes sense.
Right. So after applying the ultrasound for like a short period, he didn't feel much at the time, but later on he reported experiencing a noticeable mood boost, like he felt more energized and alert for about an hour.
Interesting. But I imagine a self-experiment, even one conducted by a brilliant scientist, probably isn't going to be enough to, like, really convince the skeptics, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
While Dr. Hameroff's experience was intriguing, it wasn't a controlled scientific study. That's where the 2013 study on chronic pain patients comes in.
Okay.
This study was designed to be much more rigorous and was published in a respected scientific journal.
Okay, so tell me more about the study. Like, what did they do differently?
This study used a double-blind crossover design.
Good.
So that means that neither the patients nor the doctors knew who was receiving the real ultrasound treatment and who was receiving a placebo.
Ah, the gold standard in research. That's how you rule out the placebo effect and really see if the treatment is having a genuine effect. So what were the results?
The results were pretty fascinating. Just like Dr. Hameroff in his self-experiment, the patients who received the real ultrasound treatment reported feeling significantly better.
Wow.
Yeah, they had improvements in their mood and even experienced a reduction in their pain levels.
Wow, that's pretty compelling. So we're talking about potentially treating chronic pain and mood disorders with sound waves. That could be revolutionary.
It's definitely promising. But, it's important to remember that this research is still in its early stages.
Right.
While the 2013 study provided some really interesting data, we need more research to fully understand how this works, how long the effects last, and if it's safe and effective for a wide range of conditions.
So not quite ready to swap our antidepressants for ultrasound just yet.
Probably not just yet, but here's what's even more exciting. More recent studies have shown that ultrasound can do more than just provide a temporary mood boost. They're finding that it can actually change how different parts of the brain communicate with each other, like what we call brain connectivity patterns.
Wait, so you're saying that ultrasound could potentially rewire the brain?
That's what the research is suggesting, yeah.
Wow.
These studies are using MRI scans to actually see these changes in brain connectivity, which hints at ultrasound triggering, like more lasting structural changes in the brain. We're not just talking about temporary effects. We might be looking at a whole new way to influence the brain's structure and function.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
So we've gone from mood boosts to potentially rewiring the brain. But Dr. Hameroff doesn't stop there, does he?
No, he doesn't.
I read something about him connecting this all the way to the universe.
You're right. He takes this idea to a whole other level. This is where we dive into the really big, existential questions about the nature of consciousness itself.
Okay.
His theory is called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORCH, or R for short.
Or, catchy name.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, what is that? Does it have to do with this conscious universe idea I read about?
It does. OR is a pretty complex theory.
Right.
But essentially, it suggests that consciousness isn't just a product of our brains, but rather a fundamental property of the universe itself.
Hold on. A fundamental property of the universe. So you're saying that consciousness is like woven into the fabric of reality?
That's the idea. Hameroff believes that those quantum processes happening in microtubules, the ones we were just talking about,
Right.
are actually tapping into a universal consciousness field that permeates everything.
Okay. I'm going to need an analogy here because that is a lot to wrap my head around.
Okay. Think of it like this. Imagine a symphony orchestra,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You've got all these different instruments. Each one is vibrating at specific frequencies to create the music.
Right.
In Orchoir, our brains are like the orchestra, and the music is consciousness. But instead of instruments, we have these tiny microtubules vibrating at the quantum level, and those vibrations are resonating with or tapping into a universal consciousness that's all around us.
That's a pretty wild concept.
Yeah.
So it's not just that our brains create consciousness, it's that they're picking up on a signal that's already out there, like tuning into a radio station.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
It's a pretty mind-blowing idea. And I'll admit it's a lot more speculative than some of the research we've discussed so far.
Right.
Yeah.
So the jury is still out on whether or not the universe is actually conscious.
Right.
But even if we set aside the more out there aspects of Dr. Hameroff's work for now, it seems like the research on ultrasound and microtubules still has the potential to completely change how we think about the brain and treat all sorts of conditions.
Absolutely, yeah. Even if Orchoir never makes it into mainstream science, the research on ultrasound and microtubules has opened up some incredibly exciting avenues for future research.
Yeah.
Think about it. If we can influence these tiny structures with something as non-invasive as sound waves, the possibilities are kind of endless.
It really is incredible to think that something as commonplace as sound waves could have such a profound impact on our brains and potentially even unlock new levels of consciousness. It even makes you wonder, what if we could use ultrasound to enhance creativity or improve learning? What if it could help us access untapped potential within our brains?
Those are some big questions.
Right.
And that's what makes this research so compelling. It pushes the boundaries of what we thought was possible and opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding the brain, consciousness, and maybe even the universe itself.
It really does. Well, I, for one, am completely hooked, and I'm sure our listeners are too. So to our listener, I ask you, what if a simple thing like vibrations could be the key to unlocking some of the brain's greatest mysteries? It's a question worth pondering. And while we're not quite ready to hand out DIY brain tuning kits, this deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about.